Hello and welcome, people. We're going to go ahead and give people a few minutes to filter in, and I'm going to go on mute because you get to hear. Otherwise, you get to hear the lovely sirens of New York in the background. As everyone continues to come in, I would like to welcome you again to the session for education on training and handling of research data, the interest group. There's just a few details about setting up and getting yourself started. And you'll see some links in the chat to our collaborative notes document. There's also, you can also see it linked on your screen right there. This is the bit.ly link where we have things set up, and we'll be taking notes in and sharing information and questions and things like that. Also in that document, you'll find links to our presentations that we'll be showing you today, as well as to some of the other reports and outputs that we intend to share, and with any luck, get your feedback on and ideas about, which we're really looking forward to. So I think we had between 40 and 50 people signed up for the session, and it looks like we're about 50% attendance. So I'll give it a few more minutes. 50% is usually pretty good. So delightful to see everyone here. Please feel free to participate in chat, say hello to any familiar names, or say hello to the unfamiliar names as well. Maybe say something about where you're coming from today and whether or not you truly feel awake at this time, whatever time it might be that you are currently experiencing. All right, we seem to have slowed down on people joining our session, so let's go ahead and give this a start. Again, welcome to all of you today, and thank you so much for joining. We're really looking forward to this discussion. We're really looking forward to sharing the work of the focus groups and what we've been working on for the past 18 months. You've seen us share this along the way at previous plenaries, and we're really at a stage now to say, hey, this is what we've done, and let's turn to the community a little bit more broadly and talk about how it can be used and where we can take this next and where we can take other actions next. So as you can see, our notes document is linked there. And if you happen to forget that, that bit.ly, it will be linked on other slides as well, and we can put it in chat again. So today we are going to be talking about stimulating global participation by advancing the discovery, use, and reusability of research data management training resources. And as like I said, really looking forward to everyone's participation and thoughts in this space. So a little bit about the background of this group. This is the Education and Training on Handling Research Data Interest Group. It's been around at RDA for some time now. So we're really happy to have such an active community that keeps this group vibrant and useful to the broader global international community around topics of education and training. You can look on our wiki page to see what work we've done in the past. And going forward, we're really looking at, like I said, sharing our outputs and thinking about implementation of these outputs and what that might look like. Now, one of the questions we often get with this interest group is, please explain the RDA thing about the interest groups and the working groups, and you have focus groups, and what's that all about? That's so confusing. So here's the deal, right? So there in RDA, there are working groups, and working groups have an 18-month life where they come together, they develop a recommendation, they put it out there, they wrap it up, and in essence, they're done. They might go into a maintenance mode, but that is the life of a working group, right? It's almost like a flash mob of work where people come together, do some important work, and then disperse to go do something else again. An interest group is a little bit more long-lived. It is a group of people with shared interests. And for this particular group, it's obviously about education and training. And it's where we come together to review what's going on across the environment, across the landscape in this space of education and training. And yet we definitely want to be focused on benefits to the community and creating things for the community beyond just presentations and sharing information, both of which are very important, but insufficient for really making change. So what we've done within this interest group is establish focus groups as well to kind of be like almost mini working groups where we follow that same kind of pathway of giving ourselves a timeline for actually creating an output that we can share with the community. And in this case, what we've been working on in the past few plenaries, there's been a focus group looking at learning resource collectors, and Maria is going to be talking about the work there. And then there's been a focus group working on minimal metadata, and Nancy is going to be talking about the work there. So we're going to have presentation and feedback on the work that's been going on. Each of those groups are going to present and run a discussion for approximately 25 to 30 minutes each to get community feedback on this and talk about next steps, implementations, applications, things like that for the outputs. Then we're going to come back together in a larger group and talk about where these items move next within RDA to make them officially supporting outputs of RDA and get whatever stamps of approval are available for them, future areas of work that will support the work of this education and training community, and then what plenary 19 might look like, then entertain any other business. With that, let's go ahead and, oh, my slides are unhappy with me today. Any questions? Please go ahead and put those in chat if you have them. Or I will also look for raised hands if you have them. You can see my inquiring face as I look at the chat and the participants list to see if there are any questions or additions.
No questions in chat yet, but yeah, please feel free to add in any points or questions or feedback.
All right. Well, with that, I am going to stop my share and hand this over to Maria, who is going to be talking about the outputs of the Learning Resources Collectives Group. So Maria, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Amy. I will start sharing my screen. Let's see here. Just find the presentation. I will have it online, the online version. Here I start the presentation, and you have it there. Good. And I will minimize myself so I can see the presentation. So yes, thank you. Yes. Our little focus group, or mid-size focus group. Yes, we have been around now for 1.5 years, since June 2020. So we got to know each other quite well by now. So really on a little bit of long-term basis, and we have been dealing with two main challenges in our group that we have kind of addressed. One is, the first one is the number of repositories and portals offering learning resources within RDM and how they can be more fair. And the other challenge that we've addressed during the years is what would be the core characteristics. How would these repositories and learning resources be described? What are the core characteristics to be added to these, so people can find them, the users can find them, and the producers can set them up. And we've started off in our group work, we started off with searching, making a wide search for the learning resources. So we made a kind of an inventory, and we have that inventory still on an Excel file of what training resources there are out there. And then we have had lots of discussions around what is needed for these resources to be both sustainable, but also to how they should be described. Let's see if I can change. Yes, I'm leading the the swap of the slides here myself. So next slide, I say to myself, yes. So we have right now, I just forgot to say also that we've been meeting on a regular basis, actually more or less monthly, and our coordinator has been Mikey Jetten. So, and at the moment, currently we have two main outputs. This inventory of the training resources and also a draft of the core characteristics of training resources, kind of a set of how to describe training resources. And I would say that this with the learning resources in RDM has been, it's a kind of a moving target for us to work with. I mean, we have both the raising interest, awareness of the value of having these resources now, both from researchers, the users, the end users by themselves, and those supporting researchers, for example, librarians, information specialists. So in these, among these targets group, it's really an what we've seen, and I've seen also the past years now, during the past plenaries, a raised awareness and interest and the need for it. So that has been kind of a challenge, but also very nice that this is something that's going to be needed. And when it comes to our main draft, our main output, this core characteristic document draft, I would say that the benefit of having such document would be twofold. I mean, it could be a help both to those who setting up these training resources, institutes, universities hosting these training resources, what they should think of when having these in production and when they plan them. But also, of course, this also could be a help for users to evaluate the training resources out there, and those also evaluating training resources for researchers, for example, librarians. So we see a kind of a need. We see a need in our group, and we're happy to hear you today here what you think about this. And these 2 outposts, they have been discussed. We have them under discussion for the last previous plenaries, plenary 16 and plenary 17, in different ways. We had last time we had a Padlet discussion, very interesting. So some of you might have heard this a little bit already, but now we've a little bit come to an end with our focus group. We will be soon closing it up, and our goal is to finalize this core characteristic document and develop it into a recommendation. And by the end of this year, we will have it as a target. But yeah, a lot of discussion we are having in our group, and we're happy to hear today what you think of it. And some of you might, we have them linked, both the characteristics document and the inventory. We have them linked from our group page on our RDA website. So now we will, I just here with Elizabeth here, shall we have the next thing here now? What do you think? We will have a discussion in a mentee questions. So we have constructed a mentee questions here. So you have the code, you go into the mentee.com and you enter this code, and we also have the QR code there, and we see what you come up with here. Do you think, I just showed here now to Elizabeth, do you think we could stream a little bit of results of this at the moment, or how will we go about?
We can. There's nothing coming through just yet, but then I can share my screen if you want to. If you want to stop sharing, I can share my screen. Hopefully, if I'm hoping that code's working. If there's any problems and it's not working, do say.
Let's see here.
The code is absolutely working. We are waiting to get people's responses, and I'm just going to throw the link to the characteristics characteristics into chat, but you can also find that in our notes document. It's linked in there too. So please go check it out. Take a few minutes to review what the work of this group, which is wonderful, and the characteristics list there, and think about your own situation as one of those multiple audiences that Maria was talking about. Maybe you are a host of a collecting platform. Maybe you are a user of learning resources. Maybe you're someone who helps to connect the two together. And think about, take a look at these characteristics and think about how you might find them useful, how you might employ or implement them in your various spheres of work. So Maria, it looks like Birgit is asking if you could say a little bit more about the characteristics.
Yes, we've been working. I can maybe share my screen to have them. It is, I would say, it has been quite hard work from time to time to come to a good level with them, or to a good language or right level. And also in the last plenary, when we have them discussed during informal of a Padlet, setting up a Padlet, we were very much asking people and the participant how to use this, integrate it in the ordinary live working tasks, and how could we integrate this to our daily life? I don't know really. I don't really see it, but that's an. I think that's something that you often feel when you are. It's kind of an innovation phase now for these kinds of tools and guidelines. No one really has done this before. I mean, it's kind of an new, both that RDM training is quite new still, yeah. So I see Nancy also want to say something.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit too. Part of the idea was at the beginning of our discussions was that we were concerned about the fact that a lot of the training, the catalogs and other places where you find training resources are there one day and not the next kind of. So there's a sustainability issue that's important to consider, to recognize. And so what we were intending to do was to try to identify the kinds of things that a training, a catalog or a portal or some sort of platform should include as information about themselves. So, what their governance practices were, what their funding model is, that sort of thing, so that, when people, including funders, look at what the platform or the portal is doing, they see that there's, something there that's of weight, that's worth continuing to fund and continuing to come back to from the point of view of a searcher looking for training resources. So the focus of them is as Maria said, both for service providers, but also for searchers who are trying to find resources and want to, be able to trust what they're finding, what the quality is of the portal, and and whether it's something to continue to come back to. So
I just want to pick up on what you were saying there, Nancy, the trust. And I think what the work this group has done is really highly related to work that we've seen on looking at data repository platforms in a way, and really finding parallels between this work and work that's been done with the the name escapes me. I'm going to go with the trust characteristics for repositories, but as well as the what's the
core trust seal?
Seal, yes, core trust seal. I was like, there's a core and there's a seal, but the core trust seal as well. And really, starting from that work and those considerations as a solid foundation, and repurposing this for what it means for learning resources as compared to research resources, right? So really what characteristics that are slightly different than those for a research data repository, a research repository, are necessary for learning repositories for those types of things. So I think it's really interesting to look at how this group has gone in and talked to different user groups, user types, to really to sort out, to pick out the specific characteristics that are necessary for learning resource collectors and learning resource platforms.
Yeah, so I have just started, so we have got some questions coming. I just wanted to highlight, somebody put that they need to read the detail first, which is completely understandable. So the mentee code will stay live up until, I think it's the 15th of November. So, we're really happy to have contributions after this plenary session and after the next plenary session. So we realize you might have ideas afterwards, because that always happens, doesn't it? You sort of have a discussion and then you go, oh, I wish I'd said that. So it will stay live.
That's a great point. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, we want to make sure that this stays open for comments. And of course, the document is there as well. As Maria mentioned, goal of this group is to really have this finalized kind of by the end of the calendar year as a supporting output from RDA. So please do take the time to read through the specific characteristics, but thinking more broadly, now that now that you have an idea more about what the output of this focus group is, really talking about the platforms, the storage and access, discovery of these materials, and how the infrastructure, the platforms support this, how you might use that in thinking about building your own platforms, developing your own platforms, thinking about what to look for in designing or maybe outsourcing those, or as someone who has a wealth of learning resources, what you might look for in like where to put your materials, or where to who to entrust your learning resources with. So I'm seeing some great comments here in the Mentee. Thank you for that. I think the good practice and guidance out there is really one of the goals in putting these characteristics out there. It will serve as that guidance, so much appreciated. Looks like we have another hand raised. Irina, please go ahead and unmute yourself. What's up?
Thanks, Amy. I'd like to build on what you said, that when we are writing digital skills for EOSC report from EOSC skills and training working group, we included these core characteristics in the quality assurance section for developing long-lasting knowledge hub and catalogs of learning resources. So for us, it was a way to double check the quality of learning resources collectors.
I think the other point I was just going to say is we also sort of see this as it could be a bit of a pick and choose approach as well, that depending on which perspective you're coming from, some of the characteristics might not be relevant. We don't see it as being a completely prescriptive list that everybody has to complete and tick every box on. So there's different aspects if you're looking for somewhere to put your resources, or if you're thinking about how you present resources.
A comment in the chat. Could we be clearer that we are talking about collections of resources if a resource equals a module or similar level of granularity? Is that Angus? And if so, would you like to unmute and talk about this a little bit?
It was me, yeah. I was just thinking that we were talking about resources without being very clear about what we meant. And I always get a little confused between this group and the other group, because the other group's talking about minimal metadata of resources, but a different level of granularity. And I think it's clear when you look at the document, but yeah, maybe it's just me.
No, I think it's an important distinction to make. I mean, there is a connection between what we came up with in the minimal metadata set and the core characteristics, in the sense that they support each other. As the platforms are supporting the learning resources, the individual modules, and so on. So, I mean, what the searcher could do, who's looking for resources in the kinds of catalogs and platforms we're talking about, is to look and see if this platform is doing the kinds of things, or can show what they're doing, so that you know that there's some, what their publishing process is, their curation process is, and that sort of thing, to get a better idea of what the level is by which they are choosing what to put in the inventory. So it's kind of a second level of association with the resources themselves, the modules themselves. So hopefully that's a little more clear. And yeah, I think it is more clear in the document too when you read it. So
yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, even the title is learning resource collectors, such as catalogs and registries.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Angus, and also the clarifications there, Nancy, and I think that was Irina. And this is a really nice segue into our next group, the focus group on minimal metadata, because we really do start getting into some of the questions that were raised around this, the funders, the date last updated for the content itself. So Nancy, I am going to go ahead and say, take it away for that discussion of the minimal metadata group and its outputs there. Again, you can see the shared notes and links to the presentation, and as well as the other resources, and I'll throw those in chat too. Looks good, Nancy. You are muted, however.
All right, good, thank you. Now, I knew there was something missing, so I could hear myself, but that doesn't do much. So yes, thanks. And there's a nice segue again to what we were doing. So appreciate that question, Angus, and the connections also that Marie was making. So it's been fun to work in both groups and see how we're addressing the whole question, the challenges that Amy discussed at the beginning. So the focus group that I'm representing here is on the minimal set. It's useful to know, I think, that at the beginning, and 18 months ago, when we were discussing this at plenary 16, I think it was, we talked about both wanting to establish a minimal set, but also talk for learning resources, but also talk maybe about extended documentation that might be more that would be not only metadata, but other kinds of guidance and so on too, that might be useful to present. But we decided to start with the minimal first and see how far we got, and then go from there. So the focus that we have had is for minimal metadata for enabling discovery and findability of learning resources. So the extended group is more about a reusability of learning resources, and we'll get to that further question when we get there. So keeping in mind that it's about discovery and findability, you can see more about what we're doing. So the goal was to identify a minimal set of metadata descriptors that can be recommended to both service providers and also resource creators, learning resource creators, that would be important for people looking for learning resources from different learning perspectives, both informal and formal educational goals and professional as well, and then from different perspectives as well. So meaning different personas, kind of, our stakeholders. So what we wanted to come up with a course set that could be adopted by those learning resource creators and service providers, and also help to kind of reduce the duplication and identify gaps among existing and prospective learning resource providers, such as the catalogs and registries that we've been talking about. So those are the goals, and we did a lot of talking too over 8 months. We met a little more frequently than the other group, about every 2 weeks for a while, well, quite a while. So it was some really interesting discussions. A lot of people came from different perspectives, both either as trainers, sometimes as searchers, as service providers. There were funders and developers there as well. So from those perspectives, the process that we used was to first do a comparison of metadata schemes across for learning resources across a number of them, including the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative from Dublin Core, the ENVRI LOM metadata, the profile of LOM that is used by the ENVRI pillar, the EOSC pilot, which you can predated our work and had some recommendations for minimal metadata, bioschemas, and then we compared all of those across to schema.org as well. So after that mapping was done, we then started thinking about user stories. What kinds of personas should we be thinking about? Because obviously the metadata, the minimal metadata, would be different from the point of view of a creator who may want to talk more about their resource, but maybe wanted just a minimal set in order to put something in. A learner that might want more information, a service provider that wanted to provide context and also some kind of quality control and maybe even marketing, and then developers who wanted as minimal as possible, usually, in funders as well. So we did some comparison across the scheme, the terms that we were looking at, and then mapped as much as we could to the FAIR principles as well, although focusing mostly on the findability because of this discovery focus. And then gotten feedback from the community from different plenary sessions. We compared to other recommendations that people have made in writing, different articles and so on. And then also, once we came down to a set, we looked at them from the learning perspectives that we talked about, formal, whether you're a formal learner, someone from an campus perhaps, informal, somebody who's just looking to learn something on their own, or they need to learn something for professional education. And so the graphic on the side there, as you can see, we started out with the mapping at the top with 84, did the crosswalk exercise, came down to 80, looked at some user stories, analysis, and focused on, what really was minimal from all those points of view to 12. Then we got more user feedback and bumped it up to 14. So there are now 14 elements that are included. And this is a graphic. When we have a graphic artist, which is actually a Renaissance woman on our group who created some lovely graphics for us. And these are all of the all of the metadata terms that are here, broken out into descriptive, those about access and educational information. So you can look at this. The recommendations, the outputs that we've got so far and are hoping to finalize again by the end of the year are a report that I've got the link to here, and I can flip to that in a second if people are interested. There's a more fleshed out image of this set in the heart shape with the definitions, and then a data dictionary which included definitions and examples. So I've got the links here to those if you're interested in looking at them. And in terms of the future, what we'd like to do is to develop, and we're working with the Dublin Core Tabular Application Profile people. There's a Google group that works on that to create a metadata application profile for the minimal set so that we can test and see what the main sort of a master instance would look like, and then if you wanted to map it to your own situation, what kinds of things you could do. We've got, I think, 10 different platforms that are working with us on it, giving some resources, and then we're mapping across those. And Angus and Elizabeth are working on that more closely, as am I. And then an information test bed is where we're doing the actual testing to see how those terms would work in different environments and what kinds of other information we might need to include in order to make it more workable. So we're encouraging and soliciting feedback and also seeking adopters. The list that we've got here include people who are either have adopted it or are considering adoption of the minimal set, including EOSC Future, Catalog, Open Air, Social Sciences and Humanities Training, Discovery Toolkit, the SHOCK Toolkit, and various national platforms in Slovakia, Germany, and perhaps others, not sure yet. So if you are interested, or you represent a service provider, would like to, we'd love to hear more about them, and can work with you to figure out how it might work for you. So the final thing then is to hand off the minimal set to that extended documentation group after we work a little bit more on adoption and making the minimal set work. So that's all I was really going to say. We can join the interest group. We definitely welcome more people, especially people from non-English speaking countries to join us. Watch for the startup of the extended documentation group. Bring back your adoption stories and add your thoughts to the plenary discussion. So let me just flip really fast to this report, just so you can see what we've got. I guess it would be helpful if I started at the top there. So it's got a pretty good, it's got a lot of the working documents, snapshots of the working documents associated with the report as well, if you're interested in looking at them, including the mapping itself, the user stories, the community feedback, and then the data dictionary is a separate document, so on, but those are all there if you're interested. So I'll stop there. Stop sharing.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy. And I think, for the discussion for this part, what we're really interested in hearing back from the group about is primarily about implementation. And you can see this, the major questions around this in the report in the way forward section. Thinking about, here is a set of minimal metadata that have been identified. How do we start using that effectively? How do we see that implemented? Where do we see that implemented? What are the challenges to implementation when thinking about test beds, when thinking about, learning resource collectors using these minimal metadata? How do we incorporate those into the places and spaces where we're working with learning resources? And one of the reasons we really want to address this as part of this discussion is we feel that, while, metadata heads love metadata, we're always going to want to do more metadata. No surprises there. But we do want it to be effective metadata. And if we are running into challenges implementing minimal metadata, then it doesn't make a ton of sense, very, very much, to start engaging with extended metadata. So let's talk about some of those challenges around implementing that minimal metadata. So looking forward to hearing back from you on this. We don't have a mentee for this part, but we do have the question box. Please go ahead, put your questions in chat, raise your hand. Really interested in hearing about challenges for implementation, solutions for implementation, actually more interested in hearing about solutions for implementation, to be perfectly honest, but challenges for implementation, how this group might look at future work in addressing some of those challenges potentially. And what is the sense of community, not so much about the specific minimal metadata elements, which we've presented and discussed before, but really thinking about, so what are we going to do with these? How are we going to get those out there? How are we going to make our community around learning and education more effective and efficient now that we have something that we can point to in terms of minimal metadata? How do we use these things? Oh, yes, the silence has worked. We have hands. Go ahead, Irina. What's up?
Yes, just a few pointers, and apologies for not completely following all the work done, because I see that it's great. 2 elements for the first work that was presented. So the characteristic or learning resources, I would just, and I'm not really certain if it will be useful at all, but in the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives, we are putting together a new, updating actually, a training website, and where we will be, putting resources in a certain kind of catalog-ish record. And I think this document could be a kind of a test element, so that I can really follow it and see, with the new redone, if I can actually follow that, or if something is missing, or if something is not possible to actually do. So yeah, looking forward to go more in detail in your work. And yeah, I think kind of these are the elements. But as for the minimal metadata, I think the challenge that we'll have in the situation that I'm describing is that these are the resources that are a bit oldish. So you might not necessarily find all the elements that are described here, because we, at the time of putting the element in repository, we were not collecting all this information. So I think that, if we will at one point try to align with larger catalogs and need to use the whole metadata structure, it might be a bit challenging. So I'm just wondering, looking quickly at the documents in table 1, is there a definition which are the mandatory or at least recommended elements?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one for now. Yeah, so what we decided to do with the minimal was to have all of them in minimal be required. Now, that you know, is not necessarily going to be possible partly for the reasons you're describing. If you haven't collected them before, then you can't go back necessarily. I mean, if you did, you're a saint to go back and collect that information and add them to the resources. And I believe that, you know, it's whatever we come up with as a recommendation, or sorry, this recommendation, which is that they're required, you know, you're going to have to interpret your own environment as well, because it's always a discussion among your developers and your infrastructure providers and your infrastructure support people and so on. So we just decided to make them required because in a lot of the discussions about some of the other ones, it looked, you know, they were more recommended, they were optional. And so we were really trying to focus on the necessity of the ones we've got for purposes of finding them. And the kinds of things, for instance, in my own platform that we have not been collecting learning objectives or learning outcomes. And partly that's because a lot of times you can't find them when people didn't really add that kind of information in the beginning when a lot of the resources were more informal. So if you can find it, great. If not, then, you know, if it's not there, you can't add you can't make a channel, you know, the creator's thinking and add it. So, you know, I think you have to take things with a grain of salt, but our decision was to just require everything that's in the minimal set. And then, you know, as we're talking more about extended, then move into recommended and optional in that area. So hopefully
I agree. And as a look here, learning outcome will be the most challenging. I don't know whether you had a chance to work further on that, but for me, for building these catalogs, what is really important, and I would encourage you to work on that, is controlled vocabularies for certain fields.
Yes, you hit that one on the head.
Yeah, like, you know, how are we writing down train the trainers? You know, it's TTT or it's train the trainer, or it's you know, something like that. You know, so I think it's just simple elements that we could all use as similar. So then, when, you know, again, our material will be harvested by larger catalogs that, you know, people can actually filter. Mm-hmm. So if you manage to do that, much appreciated.
Yeah, well, what we decided to do too, because we have had a lot of discussions about that and still need to continue. What we decided to do is put in some ideas and recommendations, but not really endorse any particularly. And then also in our examples, you'll see some controlled vocabularies that are possible. So we're kind of avoiding, you know, saying do this, do that, in terms of vocabularies, because it is such a complicated topic, and you really need to change it for your own, you know, constituents, your own audience.
Yes, it is definitely that XKCD challenge. If you're not familiar with the cartoon, I'm sure someone can throw that link into chat, where, you know, you have 14 standards and you need the unified standard for them all, and now you have 15 standards. You know, it is that challenge. I definitely hear you, Irina, on the. It would be so nice to have the one standardized vocabulary about training to rule them all. And I think it's a goal to work to. Also, thank you very much for volunteering to use both of these resources for the CESTA work and working through those and letting, you know, just to do a ground test on them. And I'm sure both Maria's group and Nancy's group will be delighted to be in touch with you about your experiences with that. So look forward to it. Thank you very much. Birgit, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, my question was in the same direction in terms of, you know, you offer keywords, but not much else. And I was thinking of, you know, at least having a rough classification ontology thing, which you could use to classify the content. I mean, expand on what's there. I mean, like the Foster Open Science classification. And then you have a basic approach, at least, even if you don't have a controlled vocabulary yet, including everything. I mean,
well, that's the kind of thing that'll show up in that application profile too, actually, I think, is to link to different controlled vocabularies that might be possible. So,
and this is also, of course, in Foster, we also use this sometimes to see the gaps. I mean, when you don't have content for certain areas, you likely have to look harder what's there. I mean, if there's not much on, say, reproducibility training or whatever, then Yeah, and I mean, it's now indeed the case that some disciplines are really starting to look, to address not just the PhD level, but also going down to master or even bachelor to create courses, and then you want to, of course, dig out this quickly when they jump on this task.
Good, thank you. Good suggestions. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Birgi. Definitely, I think yes, those ideas about what are the cultural applications and use of these items within the variety of spaces that we know they're going to be used in does pose a certain level of challenge. Definitely, it comes back to that difficulty of implementing and pointing to what is a standardized vocabulary. When you dig into it, how is that actively applied? And as Nancy had pointed out, we hope to uncover more of that during like actual use of these, so that it is an iterative process where we're going to go out and try that. Thank you for Arena for volunteering again to be one of those tryout places, and come back and improve it and figure out where those gaps sit and how else to expand or better direct, more clearly direct on the use of the standardized vocabularies that already exist out there. Fascinated to hear about the potential for implementation or application of these outputs. Anyone else out there with some ideas either about how they might use it, thinking about using this, or what are some even some solutions for the challenges that have already been mentioned?
One thing I might ask too, that the group was looking for, if anyone knows of articles or places where there's really good guidance on creating control vocabularies for your own environment. That's the sort of thing we'd love to add as references to the report too. So if you've got any suggestions about that, it'd be great to hear either in the chat or the notes.
For that, Nancy, I would guess name's Simon Cox, I think, has done quite a bit of work in this area. So you might look at his work if we don't already have those references in there. I remember a presentation from him before at an RDA about
I don't think so, but so I'll look. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah. So I already just passed this along, but within RDAP, so RDAP is a North American group of data management professionals and librarians and whatnot. There's an education and resources committee that has talked about developing some sort of resources catalog for RDAP members to reference and take advantage of. I was like, hey, look at all this work y'all have already done. So I just sent it to the co-chairs of the committee, and maybe they can make use of it. I don't know where they are in developing and trying to develop such a catalog, but I mean, taking the resources you guys have already collected in the spreadsheet and trying to put the minimum metadata on it seems like a reasonable first step, and just to see what happens. And maybe they'll be interested in it. So we'll see what they say. But that might be one implementation possibility. But that would not be me personally. It would be somebody else in RDAP. We'll see if they bite.
That sounds like a great application, Jonathan. And if you have a name to send over to Nancy, I'm sure they would both be grateful for that. So yeah, lovely.
Yeah, do you want to step in? Is that an old hand or is that a new hand?
That was a thumbs up from Maria, so yay.
Oh, that was an agreement. Thank you.
I love thumbs up too. Validation is great, lets us know we're on the right track. So feel free to throw those up there too. Any other questions, thoughts? Thinking about, again, how these might be applied in your space, what implementation might look like. Only because I think one of the things that Nancy certainly addressed in the presentation is that most of the minimal metadata really focuses on the F in FAIR, the findability of the materials. And while I think we all of us in the community are really motivated to think about the rest of the letters there, air in FAIR. We really would like to get some of the kinks worked out, get some of the problems worked out in implementing just the basic level to start with before investing a lot more time in thinking about all of the very similar issues for the remaining letters in FAIR. So really inviting the community in to dig into the problem a little bit more intensively in what these applications might look like, not just for people who might be creating catalogs, but I think also for everyone who is creating resources as well. I know, Jonathan, the RDAP group does a lot around production of resources. And I think from kind of like the library's perspective, this is true for a lot of librarians as well, definitely in North America, also in other geographical areas, but thinking more critically about how do we build good resources so that these minimal metadata elements are part of building those resources, so that when we do go out and try to put them somewhere for a broader storage and access type thing, we can make sure that they're being produced in responsible ways so that they can be found by others and shared more broadly. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I was just going to build on that point, and also that Nancy said earlier that putting some of the minimal metadata into their catalogue is they don't have it because it wasn't in the original materials. And I suppose one of the things we've started, Nancy also mentioned our testbed, and we're starting to look at across. And I think building on the point about people creating materials, they're not necessarily formally thinking about putting their materials into catalogues or working with a catalogue or something afterwards. So I suppose one of the questions we need to think about is, how do we get and disseminate this information to those people, whereas we tend to talk quite a lot amongst ourselves to those of us who are interested and engaged in this subject. So I think that might be one of the challenges that we need to think about is that sort of dissemination and further conversation with the material producers. And there's no answer. I don't have the answer to that, but I think that's something we probably need to think a bit more about and discuss, maybe through this group or through the RDA or something.
I think that's a great point, Elizabeth. And, as a proposal for next time, plenary 19, maybe we could think about doing a joint section with the libraries group in talking about these. And that might be a really great venue for thinking about some of the dissemination and getting information out there. Thank you for that thought. Maria, go ahead.
Yes, that was also exactly what I was starting to think about now. And when we will have a kind of recommendation ready by the end of the year from our group, and together, maybe merged together with the minimal metadata group, we could have that as tool or a product to go out and test, have use cases to test, well, with different stakeholder target groups, for example, librarians. And yeah, having this in a new session on the next plenary would be great. And that would probably also, hopefully also enhance the dissemination of our recommendation, of people thinking of this, having this in mind when working with the training in RDM in the future. So yes, I think that's once we have our future product, I think it will be something more concrete to come up with. And hey, do you want to test it in your community or in your group with your fellow colleagues? So yes, I think that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I've seen some other education groups pop up as well, so we might be able to share with them too. So we've reached our last item on the agenda, which I think creates a great segue for the next item on our agenda, which is is really talking about what are the next steps for these outputs, thinking about that dissemination, thinking about that spread and beyond for this. So I think the, doing some identification of some other RDA groups that we can share this with. If we have that target date for December, because there's nothing so special as the end of the calendar year to really end something. If we have that, never mind that we're all busy with holidays. Pressure is good. If we have that timeline, and I think that will go ahead and synchronize well with the RDA rhythm as well. So if we have these supporting outputs, we can push those through the process, and in preparation for Plenary 19, make contacts with some of those other education libraries group, people that we know share interests around education and training, to work with on talking about these outputs and how they might be useful in those spaces. So that's a brilliant idea there. You can see in the notes what the RDA process for approving outputs is, and really the next first best step in that is making sure that we finalized them to our and the community satisfaction, and then forwarding them to the Secretariat and tabs so they can undergo the community review phase of 1 month, and then be included in the RDA outputs catalog, and through that they will be assigned a DOI and be citable, and so that gives us and the rest of the community something solid to point at, as in this is the work that we can be referred to. Not that it should be interpreted as this is all of the work that has been done and we are now finished with this topic, but really something to point to that we can iterate on and improve upon in continued conversation with the community. I think that's a great outcome there. Thank you for that idea, Angus, as well, for another group to connect with on that. I think this really brings us to our next discussion area for the interest group as a whole. And this takes us back to our Mentimeter. So Elizabeth, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to throw up your shared screen for our next Mentimeter question. And here is the link that I've put in chat for people. But our next question is thinking about what are some of the new topics that you would like this interest group, to work on, to think about. What are some of the challenges that you're experiencing in your life as someone who is concerned in the areas of education and training on handling research data? And what are the spaces that an international group of willing participants, interested participants, might take up and just move the pointer a little bit, make a little bit of progress in making education and training for handling research data better? Yes, there are so many things. I know it's difficult to select just one. Fortunately, with the Mentimeter, you don't have to select just one. You can put all of them in, and we will go through and sort through them and bring this topic again back to the Plenary 19 to say, okay, where can we work on this? What does it look like? I want to go there. It sounded like someone else was trying to talk, but I invite that person to talk now.
It was my fault. Sorry, I clicked the link and I was going to say, I worried I shared the wrong screen, but obviously I hadn't. It's just black. There's just no comments yet. Oh, that's brilliant.
It's working. Thank you.
I know,
the person
I
who
always panic. It's when it's silent and things.
Yeah, it's that patience. You have to count to 10 slowly in your head. That's great. I think there's definitely some potential there for talking with the Data Stewards Professionalization Group and thinking about and trainers in curating educational resources. And I think that's especially interesting because often data stewards aren't just stewarding data, they are also training others in how to steward the data. So there's definitely some overlap in the professional roles themselves as data stewards who are often also data trainers. So yeah, that's a great area to think about. Thank you. I think this touches back a little bit on some of the initial work that this group did around trying to segment roles in education and training on handling research data, just because handling research data is a very large topic and it covers everything from, data scientists, data stewards, data wranglers, data cleaners, anything that has data in the name practically is going to have education and training on that research data topic. So it's thinking about what are the different roles and spaces of people who handle data. And for people who are interested in the past work on that, take a look at the wiki. The Edison group did some really interesting work in this space in terms of segmenting different roles and not necessarily KPIs, but different learning areas for these different roles and what those might look like. So there's definitely been work done on these areas. And, it might be time to take a look at refresh some of that just because the context has changed, the environment has changed. So that might be a potential area of future work or discussion for this group. I know Birgit had mentioned also, I think I did not mishear Birgit in talking about standardized vocabularies, but standardized vocabularies in different disciplinary areas as well. And that might be, an area for this group to think about partnering with some of the communities of practice being developed in RDA around education and training for specific communities of practice and what does that look like in different communities of practice. And that might be a really useful area of collaboration and building in those spaces too. It is the same as the first code, Kristen. Elizabeth has been clever in using Mentee, and I'm so grateful that she has. She's been able to pack a few questions into the same code so that we would not be confused with the different codes. So I hope that's working for people. And thank you for that question for better connecting with regions beyond EU and North America. You have presaged our next question, which is actually about better engagement. So you can start thinking about that too. So in thinking about new topics that you'd like the interest group to work on, thinking about the challenge areas for you in your space, and definitely educational methods for some researchers. And I think that's also true, like researchers aren't like a monolithic group, right? Different areas of interest for researchers demand different educational methods as well. I'm reminded there was a chat group that I'm in just this morning was talking about how one of the educators uses Pikachu as a way to talk about description and classification and all of these things as an entree into talking with different types of researchers about thinking about their data, thinking about classification, thinking more particular about description in those spaces. So I think that's a great idea, is thinking about those educational methods for researchers and whether we go to some educational research itself in thinking about what does like adult education look like. So not just thinking about pedagogy, but thinking about andragogy and how that's a different space for talking to researchers about improving their practices and what education looks like in that. Yes, the Pokemon activity for documentation practices. And Megan O'Donnell deserves credit for that one. Yeah, the assessment opportunities, that's another fabulous idea. And I think it really intersects with some of the early conversations we've had around extended metadata, because that's a little bit of that extended metadata type concept is, being able to judge something for reuse. How did it work for you? What kind of spaces did it work well for you in? Is it worthwhile reusing this or adapting it for a specific area? So I think that's definitely an area of challenge, thinking about assessment and like measures of quality or marks of quality for learning resources and resource creators. And I can see that being another focus group looking at that. So I see multidisciplinarity has popped into that, and that's a single precious word. And I would invite the person who entered that to expand a little bit more on multidisciplinarity. For the question about standards for data standards and data curators, is that for professional, if you could clarify in notes or in the mentee if that's about professionalization and education standards for data stewards and data curators? These are some really great ideas. Thank you for these. Yeah, the system that helps the discipline-specific data management modules. I've seen there are a couple of specific data management, disciplinary-specific data management modules out there, but I like the idea of like an underpinning a system to do better, so it can be that can kind of be an amplified effort, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time that you go into, I need to develop data management training for discipline X. Fascinating idea there. And I think there's work, a couple in Helsinki, someone definitely was talking about doing sprints around developing maybe some toolkits for developing data management training, and we might be able to collaborate with some of that as well. Proper citation of training resources, developing some guidelines around that, and licensing, and thinking about licensing again, part of the metadata there. All right, those are some really great ideas. I don't want to cut people off there, but I do want to move on to the next question. Remember that these mentees will be open until November 15th, so keep on adding those ideas in, definitely. The notes are also open. So returning to one of the things that came up in the mentee is engagement with this interest group. I'm sure we've noticed that we're very, very heavily engaged in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly North America and Europe, and we would like to do more with that. So thinking both about how you in your space would like to engage with this interest group, but also thinking about how we might extend engagement with the interest group, so we are able to extend our efforts as well and leverage those efforts over a broader geographical space and more areas of application, different scenarios too. So thinking about engaging with the interest group, we definitely have the plenaries, we have the Slack channel, we have the focus groups that we look at, kind of self-generative within the group as different ways to engage with the interest group. So what are some of the other ideas out there? What have you seen from other groups? Yes, there is, Maria, there is one document including it. That's our notes document. And let me see if I can get that link in there into chat again. Or if someone else can. There we go. Our notes document has all of the links to all of the things that we think you would find useful. It's the presentations, it's the reports, it's the documentation, it is the mentees, it is the wiki for past work of the group as well. So please check out the notes document, keep that bit.ly with you for future reference as well. And to Laura's point, the easiest, most low barrier way of engaging with this group, add your name to the notes document. Let us know you participated. Let us know that you are here so that we have an opportunity potentially to reach out to you again if this is an area that you are interested in. It is not the same link that appears on Whova because no one asked us about what link should appear on Whova, but the link that appears on Whova points to our actual notes document, so you get there eventually. recognizing that we are all busy and often turn to RDA as a way to help us get our work done. Thinking about what are good ways that the interest group can help you in getting your work done.
Amy, sorry, can I ask a concrete question in the element, probably to Nancy, when we're talking about the minimum metadata? And I also made the note in the document, I'm missing a publisher. And I don't know what was the reasoning behind that, why it's not there, because as I see it, just imagining for the citation, usually in the citation form, you would add a publisher, but also if you imagine that a resource is then harvested by a larger catalog, it also needs a publisher, not only the URL. And I'm just thinking whether there's some reasoning behind not having that.
That one definitely, we did have discussions about that. And actually, if anybody who's on the group remembers more specifically what we talked about, please jump in. I think we did not talk about citations specifically, which is now that you mention it, kind of odd. But I think that we were, a lot of the times, it seemed as if people are not necessarily, they're putting things in repositories rather than publishing. There's a lot of confusion about what the term publishing means, I guess. Was part of the idea. So we kind of punted on that, partly because, as you said, as I say, we didn't talk about citations specifically, but that also there was a lot of concern that we were getting too many elements for people to really add them, especially if they were mandatory. So, but I think that's a good point. If part of what we're trying to do is facilitate citation and encourage people to cite, that's something that we might want to consider. But I don't know, others have thoughts about that?
I think your point was great, Nancy, that the reason we decided to give that a pass on the minimal metadata is because oftentimes there isn't such a thing as a publisher for the learning resources that are created. That isn't a rule in the production of learning resources necessarily for a lot of the ones that are created. It definitely is for some of them, and the publisher is very important. But that was the reasoning behind that decision, is that there wasn't necessarily that thing, and to the point of not wanting to increase the elements, especially one that might be confusing in that way. But certainly something to consider going forward. Birgit, you had your hand up earlier. If you want to go ahead.
I was wondering if, the group could engage in a bit in like a brokering scoping exercise. I was contributing to a glossary a couple of months ago or weeks ago, which basically came from psychology researchers. So you might be familiar with this. It's a vast exercise of, say, 200 people. And in the end, it was, of course, not only psychology researchers, but they wanted to create a glossary on reproducibility. And so in the end, they had all kinds of things in there, but it's really vast. And then you kind of spot, of course, lots of flaws or weaknesses in their definitions, and I kind of was not able to fix everything, of course, because it's kind of super long. And they also submitted this as a paper to a publisher, so it's now publicly available on their website, of course. And so it's training resources which pop up from disciplines, but this is really an exercise where we need people who are there, and also might be a chance to alert others to jump on this as well, because you only spot this by accident, and then it's a few weeks window where you can engage with them. And
so what is the scope? What is the scoping? It's the glossary of terms for types of resources?
It's around open science, open scholarship, and reproducibility. Of course, it's the keyword for psychology research, where they start with, and it's basically a project. I'm not sure if they have any third-party funding, but it's training resources which they create, and at some point they obviously thought there is a need for a glossary, and then you have terms like metadata and so on there, and if it's such a long list, you don't manage to go through everything. And
well, if you wouldn't mind adding a link to it in the chat,
I put it into the chat.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. So it's really they are of course not aware of these resources which information professionals generate, even Dublin Core. They have no clue of certain things. They live in their bubble, and sometimes, of course, they have a chance to transcend, but it's not necessarily happening. So, yeah, engaging with disciplines.
Yes, a noble cause.
Such exercises of creation. I mean,
okay. All right, happy somebody to contact for it, but we contact in order to.
I mean, they alert their own folks through Twitter, and then you join up, and then you are in. I mean, it's.
Okay, great, thank you.
It's like we need the emergency signal. Someone's talking about these things. We need to go connect. If only the REACT is like the emergency metadata technicians.
Right, right. New CSI.
All right, exactly, something like that. Okay, well, thank you for that, Birgit. I think that's a really nice illustration about the needs that exist out there. And the challenges that we experience with connecting more directly those disciplines with experience and expertise that already exists in the world. And so I think this is another good potential idea for what other work this group might do. So if someone could please definitely capture that in the notes, would really appreciate it so much. And I think that begins to bring this session to a close. I want to thank everyone for everything that they've done. Definitely, I encourage you to continue to connect with the notes, connect with the mentee as more ideas come to you. I think, like I said, we got to our last agenda item, like 3 agenda items ahead of time. So we are obviously an efficient working group or interest group, and you want to be involved with us because we are getting the things done. We are making your lives better. We're making all of our lives better together, which is part of just the RDA ethos and something I really appreciate. So thank you very much for being a part of that and contributing to this session. Thank you for contributing to this work. It looks to me like these outputs are going to be very successful in terms of usefulness and also areas of application. So I appreciate everyone who's already spoken up about ways that they can see using these outputs, about implementing them. And I encourage you as individuals to continue to think about this in your own setting, but also think about the other people that you might know or have professional contact with, colleagues who are working in these areas, and what they might find useful about these as well. It's one of our major challenges, of course, continues to be outreach and dissemination of spreading this knowledge, of creating connections with the expertise. So working on that a little bit more. I think the ideas around what should next plenary look like for this interest group, I think we have a lot of good ideas there. And again, focusing on those areas of connection and spread of these materials, as well as taking a step back and re-looking at what areas this group might pursue next. So I think that's a fairly good plan for our next plenary. If anyone has an issue with that, you can speak up now, you can speak up later, but do speak up. And I think that's what I would like to leave everyone with is do speak up. This community is made of all of us, and it's here to support all of us in our work. So continuing to contribute to that by having your voices heard is great. Thank you for that. And I'll leave the chat in the room and the documents and everything open for the next 5 minutes, and wish everyone a great rest of their plenary. No matter how chaotic the time zones might feel to you right now, we do have another session. We have another session for this group. So if you would like to hear other perspectives from other time zones about these topics, I would encourage you to join there. It is happening, I want to say in the 9th session on the 11th of November. I'm going to get my session numbers and my date numbers mixed up. It is not the 11th of November. Nancy's lips are saying it is a different date, so correct me.
I think it's the 10th.
The 10th of November.
It's on my slides too, yeah.
You know, dates are immaterial because of time zones
9th.
anyway. So it's, there
Tuesday
you go.
the 9th at, 2300 UTC. Yeah.
It's both days. It's both days.
Yeah, that's right.
It's both days. So again, if that works for you, please join up again, help us continue the conversation, help build these outputs, help to think about other places where we can see these outputs exist. If you cannot be in that session because things, life, sleep, whatever, reach out to someone else who can, who you think might be interested, who you think should be interested, should have a voice in these conversations, should be seeing the work that's being done in this group. And we would be delighted to welcome them as well. So thank you again, all of you, and have a great rest of your waking period for now. Have a great rest of your plenary. And I look forward to seeing you, not just in the repeat of this session, but in other sessions as well. Bye.
Thank you so much for today.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Amy, do you want us to stay for 5 minutes or?
I'm going to